Hello there beautiful, how are you today? Welcome back to my channel, I'm Joesephyr and welcome to another Should You Pull video for Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia. Now we have rather a lot to cover today because not only are we getting the first of ExDeath's BT batch banners, so we're going to have a new BT to look at, but we're also going to have an LD board for Ciaran that changes him quite dramatically into being much better, and also Lion with a brand new LD and reworked kit that makes her a lot better as well. So we've got two banners to cover here, and then of course we have the Lufenia mission to cover as well, so if you're interested in all of that and more, then stay tuned and keep on watching. Of course, don't forget to check out all of the links in the description box below for all of my social links, including Twitch, where you can find me streaming 5 days a week, and Patreon as well, where if you wanted to support the channel further by pledging on there, there's lots of benefits that you can get on there as well. All of that's linked to the description box below. One of the benefits for my patrons, I do a random shout out every time I release a video, and today that person is going to be DJ Laws, who has been on my Patreon for a long time now, so a massive thank you goes out to you and all of my patrons, and they have lightning on their title card, so perhaps you'd like a title card of your own as well, and you could get your favourite character featured on there. I hand make them all myself, and it's something that I'm very proud of doing. Don't forget, of course, to check out all of the other content creators there are for Dissidia Opera Omnia, as they all work just as hard as I do, and all of the other resources pertaining to the game as well. So as I said, we actually have a lot to cover in this particular video, so we're actually going to cover the banners separately, because there's two of them, and we're going to talk about them individually. So in this particular banner, the first of which, we're going to have ExDeath with his brand new BT, and this is the banner that will have his LD and EX, etc. as well, and this is where you're going to be able to get his full kit if you don't have his LD already, but it also features a return of Ciaran's LD, as well as Ciaran getting an LD board, which is actually quite transformative to the character, so we're going to look at that first. It also contains Thancred EX because Chaos challenges. There's pretty much no reason why you're pulling for EXs only at this point. But Ciaran, like before now, I do have a video on Ciaran, of course, from when his LD came out the first time around. He's fine, like he's always been okay, like his auras were always really powerful. He had attack, max bravery, massive initial bravery buffs, and defensive buffs as well. So he actually has quite an eclectic kind of range of buffs that he provides, which means that he can pair up with a lot of nice characters very well. He also has Brave Regen and Brave Overflow auras and stuff like that, which nice. But the problem that he always had is that he only had 3 uses of his LD, so he only had 8 turns of the buff that stopped his stacks of his Drop of Myrrh, which is his most important buff, from falling off. So you didn't really get enough time with Ciaran in order to like really capitalize on those buffs. But you also didn't really have an awful lot of damage out of Ciaran either. Like, his Holy Restrike was good, like it was fine, but it was a 6-hit Brave HP attack that dealt 100% splash damage, which is okay, it's fine, but it's not going to break the bank in these days. Now, first things first, Ciaran's LD board adds an extra use of his Shadow Blade, which is his LD attack, which means that he's going to get another 8 turns of his World Memories buff, which means he's going to be able to keep those, like, keep all of his buffs together for as long as possible, and this is very important. Then he also gets more hits. He also gets to extend the duration of his other buffs as well, so the ones that come from his Bash and his EX as well, so you're not having to rely on those quite so heavily, because Bash and Caravan Memories still aren't the greatest attacks in the world. Like, they're okay, but yeah, they're just not fantastic. And then he also gets some Brave Refund on top of it. And he also gets some additions to the World Memories buff. So it's not just there so that you don't fall off with the Drops of Myrrh that he has, but he also improves his Brave Regen. He gives Brave damage and HP damage up, which is huge, because now he's like an offensive powerhouse in terms of Aura Bot. And he also gets a new attack from it, which is his Soul Shot ++. So when he had 5 Drops of Myrrh before, you'd get Soul Shot, which was a Bravery Battery for the party, and then a 4-hit Brave HP attack with 50% splash damage. Now you get Soul Shot ++, which is the same, except you get 2 4-hit Brave HP attacks, and then you get 50% splash damage at the end of the last one. So this is actually pretty huge for Ciaran, because the only reason you'd actually use his other attacks now, so Bash, well, Holy Restrike is still useful. It's still 100% AoE damage, and as long as you've got his World Memories buff, it's not going to consume your stacks of Drops of Myrrh. But Bash and Caravan Memories are just, like, fairly average attacks that don't do a lot of damage, and the only reason you'd really use these is to keep his other buffs up so that you're getting the most out of his auras and buffs in general. But now you have an attack that you can spam with him because his HP plus is spammable because you're not losing drops of Myr thanks to World Memories. And he's now providing bravery damage up and HP damage up on top of big attack auras, big initial bravery auras, brave regen that's quite significant. It's actually quite a lot. The only problems with Ciaran are that as a pretty much specifically support-based character, he doesn't heal, which is a little bit irritating. Like, it's not gonna like the make or break for Ciaran, but it's a little bit annoying that you'd have to bring cool abilities or another dedicated support character in order to cater to heals. And the thing with Ciaran as well is that he doesn't have anything really that sets him apart from any other characters except for the size of his auras and how many of them he provides at once. So he's not going to be able to, like, do AoE Brave Shaving to help you with that, apart from on his EX, which isn't the strongest move in the world anyway, or his LD, which you typically only want to be using to refresh his buffs. Like, he's kind of very static. Like, he is really good. Like, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of really nice things to like about Ciaran, and the fact that we know he gets a BT plus in the future is also noteworthy. But he's not a character that I feel is needed at any given point. If you have an overabundance of resources, or you don't have ExDeath LD and want his full kit as well, brilliant character to go along for the ride. And I think that honestly, some people, if they are pulling on these banners, are likely to be pulling for Ciaran over ExDeath in some respects. Of course, Ciaran also gets an LD call ability now as well with everything else. So the LD call ability is fine. It's nothing hugely special. It's got a lot of nice sort of extras. So party initial brave up, brave damage, HP damage, and brave overflow up for and some brave regen. So it's a lot of nice things that you might want access to, but it's nothing that you're going to specifically need to take. I find that with a lot of cool abilities, you tend to take abilities that like you need for a particular reason. Like, so for example, you need Faris or Tidus or a debuffer just so that you've got something that will last for a while you're pummeling them with lots of like turn hogging characters, or you want something like Warrior of Light where you need to be able to shield HP damage. There's a lot of as and when it comes to taking cool abilities, which is actually very mirroring of your main party composition. And Ciaran falls into, well, yeah, he's really good, but I don't feel like I ever really need him, and that's the same for his cool abilities as well. In terms of his high armor, he gets support keystone and then 10% across the board for the party for brave and HP limits, which is nice. Even brave and HP caps is good. But it all depends on whether you're going to use Ciaran a lot or whether you're planning on going for his BT plus in the future. Do you feel that you really need Ciaran? I don't think so. Personally, I think he's really cool, and if you want him, there's absolutely no reason not to go for him. Like, he's not a bad character by any stretch of the word, but I think this close to BT plus era, Lufenia plus era, then I think we need to be cautious on who we're spending out on. We do have lots of really strong support-based characters, like we have Yuna right now, we have Y'shtola coming back fairly soon. Ciaran's really good, but do you absolutely have to have him? I don't think so. Okay, so now let's talk about ExDeath. Seeing as he's had his LD already, I've already made a video about the LD, etc. Then you can go and watch that if you want complete details on everything ExDeath does, but he's not the character that gets the new LD and the complete rework, but he does get a rework that actually adds to him a fair bit. So, Black Hole and Olmagest, if you've not used ExDeath before, he works in a very strange way where he doesn't actually deal bravery damage as such. He instead does, like, bravery draining, as opposed to like percentage damage or anything like that. He reduces enemy braveries by a percentage of his attack, so it's very important to make his attack as high as it can be for multiple reasons, and then he gains bravery like in a similar sort of proportion to what he drained from the enemies, and then does HP damage. So he doesn't actually do bravery damage, and because of this, he can't break enemies, and this is a good thing in a lot of situations in which you would use him, certainly in this Lufenia coming up today, or in this video, so you'll see where that application lies. Now, Black Hole has now been made so that it deals splash HP damage, and it increases in splash HP damage depending on how strong the Bud of Darkness debuff he has on the enemy. So Bud of Darkness is a sapping debuff that stacks up to 3 times, and the previous purpose of this was to make it so that his EX could inflict the Power of the Void debuff if they were at max stacks, meaning that their next HP damage was null, and then they drain all of their bravery afterwards. But now it has another use, which is making it so that Black Hole deals more splash damage over time. So Olmagest, which is one of his attacks that inflicts an HP poison attack, which is the thing that ExDeath is known for, now does 2 HP dumps, which is very nice, and it increases his damage quite a lot, but it also increases the HP damage dealt by the curse itself, and inflict the increase in stat drains that it gives. So it increases attacks, defense, and speed down. Then his LD board also makes it so that he gains a lot more bravery when he does it, so it means he's going to deal more damage, typically speaking. And this, like Maelstrom before, reduces all enemies' bravery to 0, and then does a 100% AoE HP damage attack, and then gives you a free ability use on the following turn, so you'd be able to apply Curse, or you could just use Olmagest to make it so that you've got more damage, or you could use Black Hole if you needed to get the Bud of Darkness buff, whatever you needed to do in order to get him going. And then you'd also get a lot more damage from his from the curse itself, or from the second curse from the Dissipating Vortex, so that you'd end up with 2 lots of very powerful HP poisons, or certainly more powerful. In the case of the Diffusing Vortex, it's actually 3 times as powerful, so the HP poison itself is going to be stronger. But the star of the show for ExDeath is his BT weapon. So Absolute Power of the Void makes it so that you do a similar sort of thing to the rest of his kit, where he does a large amount of Brave draining and leaves them on 0, because the only way he can actually break an enemy is with his Brave attack, which you're realistically never going to use. And then he does a very similar thing in terms of burst effect to Cloud of Darkness, at which point, like at the start of any turn, as opposed to at the end of any turn, they get HP poisoned, and it doesn't matter if it's their turn or yours. So you could use this certainly as a friend unit. ExDeath makes for a fantastic friend unit by just inflicting HP poison next to somebody like Terra or Tidus, or anyone that hogs a lot of turns very quickly. And ExDeath is actually very slow as well, so you can actually extend this for as long as you need it to be. It's only for 3 turns though, as opposed to Cloud of Darkness is. But you don't have to worry about Cloud of Darkness breaking an enemy and stealing a turn and therefore draining it that way. So you can have this go on for a very long period of time. And the nice thing with this one as well is that instead of it being bravery damage, it actually batteries your party at the same time as dealing that HP poison. So whether you like the HP poison aspect of ExDeath is going to be something that's entirely up to you. Like some people, I mean myself included, I'm very excited for ExDeath. And I'll spoil the should you pull part from my perspective anyway. I'm actually not going to be pulling on any of these banners because I'm saving for as long as I can until Divine Pandemonium. But I'm actually going to BT token ExDeath, and I'm not going to make this a repeat of Emperor, where I ended up not doing it because I was stupid and I decided to go with Varn instead, which I ended up not regretting in the end. But I think ExDeath has a lot of applications that people don't really think of because he's so unique. Like, I've seen him used in Dimensions and Transcendence Tier 6. I've seen him used in Sarah's Lufenia Plus when she comes around. I've seen him in Alphanos. I've seen him in Selfies and Charlottas. There's lots of applications, but like ExDeath doesn't necessarily have to be super powered to work. He's just a character that is so unique and so different from anybody else that there's something to be said and noteworthy about his kit. And that BT effect can actually really play into a lot of hands as long as you're using it and applying it correctly. Lots of people are excited for Sid Reigns and Aphmau. ExDeath's actually a really good pairing with those two because they like to sort of swap turns between one another so that you can then take as much advantage of ExDeath's BT effect as possible. Of course, a lot of this can be done with a BT friend ExDeath as well as having one yourself. I personally would quite like to have him on the back of the fact that I do already have the LD, so I don't have to pull for it here, and I think that there's like a uniqueness to him that I think I would really enjoy. Do you have to have him? No, probably not, though you are going to want to friend one for his Lufenia at least, but I think that he's very interesting to say the least. Now, ExDeath's call abilities are also very interesting, much like the rest of his kit, in that they reduce target's bravery by a large amount. In the case of his LD call, they reduce it straight to 0, and then don't inflict break. So if you're using a character that likes to break enemies, then great, you can take advantage of ExDeath that way. Not only that, but you actually do get the Bud of Darkness, so the Sap, the Curse, and the Diffusing Vortex from his call ability. So if you want HP poison for any enemy that requires it, or like through Lufenia Orb that requires it, much like this one, then you could use ExDeath's call abilities to help you with that. Basically, there aren't any other characters that really do HP poison like ExDeath does at this point in time in the global version, so he is, as of this point in time, completely unique. Alphino actually gets something like this later down the line, as does Ida, so there are other characters later on that have an HP poison effect, but as of right now, in global, ExDeath is the only one. And then in terms of his high armor is really interesting, because obviously ExDeath has no use for bravery cap, like bravery damage cap. He doesn't do bravery damage, it does nothing for him. So the fact that he has Tactics Keystone in his armor makes sense, because it goes well with his curse and stuff like that. But instead of having bravery damage cap, he actually just has HP or held bravery cap increased by 40% at blue armor, which, if you're going to use ExDeath a lot, you could use this, but you want his attack to be sky high if you're going to make use of this. Like, you need his attack to be as high as possible, because everything he does scales off of his attack, even though he doesn't actually do bravery damage. His poisons, including his burst effect, scale off his attack. He wants to have a support next to him that's going to augment his attack as much as possible, because like I said, everything scales off of it. So as long as you keep that in mind, ExDeath can be a really enjoyable character to use. So as I said earlier, there's actually two banners that we need to talk about here. This one doesn't have ExDeath's LD on it, but does instead have two others. One of which is the return of Ignis's LD, which is actually a really great place to pick him up if you don't already have him. But we're also going to be getting Lion's full kit, including her brand new LD, as well as Edge and EX, because Chaos Challenges, you know how it is with EX onlys at this point. Now, Lion is a very interesting pick here. Lion previously was always very awkward. I really enjoy using Lion. Like, I've had her EX since it came out with Aphmau. Really like using Lion because of her abilities to do fairly decent debuffs, a half decent amount of damage, and having Dispel on her EX. But she was always very awkward, because in order to get the actual stronger versions of her attacks, you'd have to use Sneak Attack on its own, which is just a 4-hit Brave HP attack that didn't really do a lot, and it also meant that you also had a problem with Lion in that she only really did well when she was attacking enemies that weren't targeting her, because she'd do 150% damage if that was the case. Her LD fixes a lot of her issues, like a lot of them. Now, bear in mind as well that she does have Cursed Artifacts. She is one of the 6 characters that has them, and they're very important to her kit. So if you don't like farming artifacts, I would very heavily consider skipping Lion, because they're rather important to her. One of them increases her max bravery and the uses of her powder keg, which she only normally has 5 uses of, so you're going to want those. And the other increases her attack and max bravery by 20% while she's buffed, which she should always be buffed. Now, her LD. So her LD is a 6-hit Brave HP attack that goes off twice. So 2 HP dumps in an LD, not bad, could do better, right? And that gives her a new buff called Bully. Now, her Bully buff is a bit silly for her. It's very useful. It increases her attack, her max brave overflow, her crit damage, because she has crit rate up on her skill 2 as well, her HP damage up, which is very good considering how many HP dumps she's going to be doing. Her abilities ignore the condition for not being targeted. So now that's going to make it so that her abilities do the damage they're supposed to do. And also, while she has her passives equipped, she always has the hide versions of her skills. So previously you would have to use Sneak Attack in order to get the hide versions of these skills, and that made her a lot weaker, sadly. Now, Sneak Attack still isn't the best attack in the world on its own. And 2 HP dumps, like I said, we could do better than that, right? So you get these for 12 turns, and you get 3 uses of Pirate Pummel, which is fine, but you also get a follow-up attack from Bully. And this goes off no matter what she does as well. So, while Bully is active, you get a 2-hit Brave HP attack that goes off twice, so that's another 2 HP dumps on what she's doing. She then does splash damage after she's done that, so she gets splash damage on everything that she's doing. You also remove a buff from the target, so this is leaning more into her Dispel style where her EX came into play. And it's also dealing weakness damage because her whole kit deals weakness damage now that she doesn't have to care about being targeted or not. This elevates her damage potential rather a lot. Like, when we look at her EX, for example, so Walk the Plank Light, when you use this after you used, or after any ally took a turn, she would then get a 4-hit Brave HP attack that went off twice, and then you get another 4-hit Brave HP attack that went off afterwards. So including the Bully, you're now getting 5 HP dumps from her EX. So that's the thing, depending on how you've buffed her, etc., with HP damage percentages and stuff like that, you can get a lot of damage out of Lion, like a lot. And you're getting recovered skill uses from using her EX, which is a decent recast rate, so after 2 skill uses you'll get this. So bearing in mind that you're using one of the regenerated ones, getting all these HP dumps, you're getting half decent debuffs from her skill 2 as well. So you get a defense down to 60% and a max brave down to 25%. You get turn rate down as well from her EX. It all adds up to a really nice package. You also get from her LD a new bravery attack called Bully, which is a 4-hit bravery attack, but you do get the follow-up from Bully afterwards as well. That then moves her next turn to right after a selected ally. So if you're not so fussed about dealing loads of HP dumps or the recharge rate on her EX, you can use this to make sure that she's always going to have access to the light, or the walk the plank light, as opposed to regular walk the plank, and getting that extra brave dump in there. So all of her kit adds up really nicely. So why am I not throwing everything at Lion? The reason for that is Beatrix. Now, Beatrix comes around very soon again with her LD boards, and we haven't talked about Beatrix all that much on the channel recently, but they make a huge difference to Beatrix, who is also a very dispel-heavy character. Now, yes, Lion does a lot of damage with 5 HP dumps in her kit, but over time, that's going to wear down in favour of other damage dealers. Like, damage dealers are a dime a dozen, as we all know, and certainly going into a new era, that's going to play a part in it all. Now, I'm not saying that Lion is bad. She's actually very good at this point in time, and she doesn't drop off instantly either. But Beatrix provides HP regen, the defensive buffs, the paladin's protection. She does a lot of other stuff, as well as having a trap / follow-up attack that, you know, also does dispel. So and as somebody who already has Beatrix, I don't feel the need to now pull for Lion as well, when in a couple of weeks' time, I'm probably just going to switch her for Beatrix and then have a different damage dealer that typically would have a BT attached to them. So while I think that Lion is very interesting and very good, I think this one plays into where your position is in the game itself. So if you don't have Beatrix, for example, or you don't have Ignis, or you're looking for a place to look for like ExDeath BT, Lion's pretty good. Like, she's certainly not bad by any stretch of the word. Like I said, all those stuff I said where she's dealing loads of damage and all those HP dumps, that can be backed up quite nicely. So if you're able to do that, Lion's really good. Personally, I'm taking this as an opportunity to save as much as I can. Even as somebody that wants ExDeath BT, I'm probably going to be BT tokening ExDeath, as I said earlier, so that I'm not tempted to pull on these banners, which is a really weird reason, I'm sure, for a lot of people, but knowing we don't have any free pulls or anything, I'm probably just going to pick up BT token ExDeath, and that will stop me from wanting to pull for Ciaran and Lion, because while they're both really good, I know that in the future we have another era coming, and I know that there are other characters that I'm going to want more from that pool. And so this is all a very personal thing. I think that there is no right or wrong answer when it comes to these characters. If you're missing Ciaran, ExDeath, Lion, Ignis, all of them are good characters. If you don't have any of them, that's where it's all high value stuff. And we do have a Divine Summon coming next month as well that should replenish resources. If you've got, if you're in the same position as me, where you've got ExDeath and you've got Ignis, do you need to have Lion and Ciaran? That's something I think that you'd need to ask yourself before you just considered pulling on any of them. And then lastly, Lion's call abilities are nice. They're quite nice. Sadly, you don't get any bully follow-ups from either of them, which is a shame, because I think it would elevate them rather a lot. But Sneak Attack gives you 20% attack up and 50% crit rate up, which is useful. You know, if you're looking for someone to use in DE Transcendence for the crit rate or anything like that, then perhaps you might want to consider bringing Lion along for that if you haven't finished it already. And then her Pirate Pummel Call is her double HP dump that increases crit brave damage by 50%, attack up by 30%, and then gives you brave overflow and HP damage up for the boot as well. So if you're after like a purely offensive call ability, you could look at Lion, but I don't think there's anything that massively stands out for her that I wouldn't bring the likes of Tifa if I wanted damage, or Aranea if I wanted critical damage. So while I think she's good, I don't think she particularly stands out. Lion's like high armor. She has attack keystone, which makes sense, and her attack being very high right now. Like I would at least, if you're going for Lion, I would at least pick up that. And then because she has so many HP dumps in her kit thanks to her bully follow-up, I think that it's good that she has brave damage cap rather than HP damage cap, or HP damage held cap. I think that because she's got 30% extra bravery damage, that's all going to add up really nicely, considering that she only gets maybe 2 hits between her HP dumps, so the more damage you're dealing with them, the better. Again, like I said earlier, I think this is a case of you need to kind of identify what it is you're actually looking for from a Dispel unit. If you want a damage dealer that happens to have Dispel in their kit, Lion's very powerful, and she will do you well. If you're like me and you prefer having a more support-oriented lineup, then you'd be probably looking at Beatrix, especially if you already have her LD, because her LD does a lot of Dispel in her kit, and then her Rose Petals debuff now is not only a follow-up, but becomes a trap as well, so it then like counters them putting the buffs up in the first place. So this one is a take it as you see it type deal. Whew, so now that they're all done, let's take a look at the Lufenia mission that comes along with ExDeath. Now, ExDeath's Lost Chapter, if you've done that before, it's the same fight, essentially. Like, if you've seen the bosses before, the Astaroths, their gimmick is that they will put up a aura around one of them at a time that makes it so that if you break them, they will do lots of horrible things to you. Like, they will gain loads of bravery as well, so you have to deal damage enough so that they don't kill you, but not so much that you break them and they counter you with this attack that takes your buffs away, gets rid of their debuffs, delays you, put this really nasty debuff on you that cuts your max bravery in half. Lots of really nasty things. So do not, under any circumstances, well, not under most circumstances, break the enemy while they have this aura up. So they'll swap which one of these has the aura. So really, in terms of dealing damage, what you want most, if not using somebody like ExDeath, is somebody that can do single target bravery damage, high scale AoE HP damage, somebody like Terra or Varn. So characters like that will work really well. Now I also think that you can run characters like Porum and like, you know, characters that don't actually deal brave damage at all in order to deal HP damage. So Warrior of Light will work well here because Warrior of Light works well in most things, as does Porum. And then ExDeath obviously drains their bravery and makes it so that they can't go any lower than 0. So that also works. Now I say that most circumstances you don't want to break the enemy. There are situations in which you can do it and it not trigger their counter attack. Follow-up attacks, as far as I can tell. Now, I've watched a lot of videos here, so I want to make sure that I'm putting a disclaimer here that from what I've seen and watched from a lot of different players, things like Yang's follow-up and Cloud of Darkness's BT follow-up don't trigger their break follow-up or break counter. Cool abilities also don't trigger it. So if you wanted to, you would want to make sure that you're like able to break on those and make sure you're like timing those correctly. I did have a quick look after talking in my Discord about what Core would do here, because he's not a follow-up, but he's also kind of a follow-up, and he did get countered. So that's an interesting sort of note to make as well. So if anything you could experiment with, if you want to prepare for this particular raid, you could go into like ExDeath's Lost Chapter and try things out and like make that your way of learning what works and what doesn't. Now the orb here is a little bit problematic. You can get by inflicting debuffs every turn, but it only increases the count by 1. So this is only going to work with a character like Terra, where they're spamming Meltdown, and that does inflict a debuff 1 to each enemy, so that'll count for +1. Varn's White Whirl will do it as well because of Blind. There are ways of doing that, and I have seen clears that don't use ExDeath at all, but taking damage from HP poison increases the Lufenia orb by 10, and this orb is there from the start of the fight all the way to the end. So to do this without ExDeath, who is the only character that can do this, is problematic. Luckily, friend units exist. So if you're taking characters that take a lot of turns in a row, like Terra, then you can take an ExDeath friend unit and just have that be your way of doing it, because that way you're like taking lots of turns. Yang can do follow-ups if you want to take Yang, or Cloud of Darkness if you wanted to make it so that BT, like, you know, follow-ups were flying off from Cloud of Darkness, and then that way you're not triggering the trap or anything, so that when you're going off to do Chaos Wave, you're not accidentally clipping the second Astaroth with the aura up. Past that, you could just, like, make it so that they never get a boss turn, and honestly, it's probably the easiest way to go about it, especially if you're taking an ExDeath friend unit so that you don't ever have to worry about the orb, because you want that BT aura to last for as long as physically possible. So that's the way that you're going to be able to get around the Lufenia orb, and then after that, you really just want to make sure you keep your defenses up. Warrior of Light, like I said earlier, very good because it's going to stop you from getting HP damage too heavily, even if they do inflict some nasty debuffs on you. Porum also works very well, and she does damage that doesn't break enemies as well. And then after that, you're just going to kind of want to keep up as the HP poison and keeping up damage until they're dead. So now we come to the big question whether we should be pulling for ExDeath's banners. This is really awkward, or a really difficult batch to kind of look at, because while all of the characters featured on these banners are actually very good, they're all also quite underestimated. Perhaps with the exception of Ciaran and ExDeath. So, like, with those two, like, if you have neither LD on the banner, then I'd say it's at least worth a few tickets. But, like, you'd probably be surprised by a lot of these characters. Like I said, Lion is not a character that many people typically go all in on because she's been quite lackluster in the past, but she definitely elevates herself at least to the current standard of damage dealers that happens to have Dispel and fairly strong debuffs in their kit, and she's kind of shaken off all of the dodginess that she had before when it came to being targeted. However, because she's a damage-based Dispel user as opposed to one like Beatrix, who is support-based and has access to Dispel, then, or even Balthea, like his LD boards come up like in the next, or like in a few months' time as well, and he's still got a lot going for him as well. Like, there are other alternatives to Dispel. Cloud even is a damage-dealing Dispel unit thanks to his World of Illusions weapon. That means that she's not all that much of a standout, except for the fact she does a lot of HP dumps in her attacks. That might be something that appeals to you, in which case definitely go in and give her a try. You might be very surprised by her. Ciaran has these huge auras that are in a really eclectic kind of mix between Initial Bravery, Defense, Attack, Max Bravery, Brave damage up, HP damage up. There's loads there, but he doesn't heal. So he doesn't, like, you'd still have to make up for that in certain fights where you need to have HP recovery, whether it be in your calls or in your main party. And yes, he does have a much better capability of dealing damage with his Soul Shot, but he's not dealing the same sort of damage as, you know, Yuna, for example, where, like, she's able to deal a lot more damage, but she's also providing, that's because she has a burst and because she's providing, like, a lot of healing and things like that at the same time. So there are reasons to go for everyone here. I didn't even mention Ignis all that much, and he's still really good, even if the best thing about him is his LD call ability. But I definitely think he's one of the greats, because his regular call ability is a heal for the party, and then his LD call ability is a damage bursty type deal where you're enchanting, imperiling, and increasing HP damage. So he's got like a cover all LD like call suite, which is really nice. So if you haven't got Ignis or Lion, then that's a banner that's worth picking on. And ExDeath himself is actually very good. Like, ExDeath is one that often gets swept under the rug, and, you know, there's a reason for that. He's the last of the BTs before BT Plus hits. He still doesn't have a BT Plus over in JP, so we have no idea what's going to happen with that. And we're all coming to the end of the LD era in JP, in theory, because, well, there aren't many left to release. So we don't know what's going to happen with that. But I've seen ExDeath used in very recent JP events, so I'm surprised at how much longevity he actually has. But again, if you have his LD, are you going to now pull on Ciaran for Ciaran alone with the chance of getting the BT? Or would you rather skip everything in order to kind of save for Divine Pandemonium and the banners that come around with that? I think if you're going for ExDeath's BT, this is probably one of the better places to do it, because your other alternatives are going to be Xander and Zell, which some people will really like, but Zell is a damage dealer, and he's a good damage dealer, but he is a damage dealer. And then you have Deuce and Vivi, where most people already have Vivi thanks to his Global First. So realistically, it's all dependent on what you want, what your resources look like. I'd say if you were struggling for resources, I probably wouldn't pull here. If you're like, I mean, if you're in the same position as me, as I said earlier, like I have Ignis and I have ExDeath. So what I'm probably going to do is BT token ExDeath to remove the temptation for me to pull on ExDeath's banners, which hopefully means that I'll have more resources going into BT Plus era. So I honestly think this is a bit of a weird one, and I'm erring on the side of caution and probably recommending not pulling on it, but I wouldn't fault you if you did, because there are some really good characters here. Ciaran more than Lion. So now that we know what I think, let's have a look at what everyone else thinks with Would You Pull, the section of the video where you, the viewer, get your chance to let your voice be heard and say whether you would or wouldn't pull on any given banner and why. So with ExDeath's banners, I think a lot of people are very torn on this. And a big thank you, of course, goes out to my patrons for their votes and comments. And if you'd like to see the full database, feel free to join up on Patreon as well, because I can only post so many comments per video. So we'll go straight into the numbers. 17% of people said they were going to use gems here. 24% of people said they were going to use 100 or more tickets, 28% of people said they were going to use less than 100 tickets, and 31% of people said no. So it's leaning towards no, very similar to what I think as well. And I think that because there's just so much uniqueness to ExDeath, and there's a lot of underrated and undervalued characters here that a lot of people really love to fight for the underdogs. So going into some of the comments, straight up, Doma Dragoon says, is there a character out there who's been hit with bad timing hammer worse than Lion? She keeps showing up right before a new level of power, good enough to be considered, but not good enough to be a priority. Here we go again. Since I picked up Ciaran and ExDeath the first time, I'm going to skip here. Lion is very unfortunate with her timing. Like, she came out like when Aphmau's EX Plus came out, which made it so that Lion kind of got shoved to the wayside, and it happens a lot with poor Lion. I do think that she's better than some people give her credit, but I also completely understand why she gets skipped by a lot of players and why I'm probably going to skip her. I think she's really cool, but if, as someone who doesn't have Ciaran or Lion and them being on separate banners, I'd definitely rather have Ciaran than Lion, because the auras are massive, the HP plus spam is there, he has a bright future because he has a BT plus coming, like way ahead in time. There's a lot to like, and I think if you were going to pull on one banner and not the other, it all depends entirely on what you have and what you don't. Aurelia says, the only LD I have on both banners is Ciaran. I plan on spending gems on both ExDeath and Lion LD, and I'll be happy if I get Ignis or ExDeath BT along the way. I generally pull for favourites and fun unique kits now, with meta being a bonus, but only because I have enough resources to pull more during the Lufenia Plus era. ExDeath and Lion fit the bill for exciting kits and will allow me to try different party comps in upcoming fights. I love ExDeath's kit, and I really, really do. Like, I think that there's no one quite like him, and I really appreciate him for it. The fact that he's FF5 obviously helps. But I don't think that there's anyone that does HP poison in the same way. Like, even later down the line, like, Ida still breaks enemies, like, she still does damage, she just has HP poison, so does Alphino. Whereas ExDeath is so unique and weird that I can't help but love him. So I think that, you know, and as someone who has the LD, I would really like to have the BT. If I didn't have the LD, would I be pulling for it? Probably, purely because both of them have quite a nice future. Whether I'd pull particularly heavily on it, I don't know, because none of them are mandatory. I mean, very few characters are these days, but these aren't as hyped as your Sid Reigns or, you know, your Aces, your Bart's BT pluses, things like that. So they are more skippable than others for sure. J-Dog says, I'll be spending several hundred tickets for ExDeath and a few hundred tickets between his others featured BT banners. His HP poison mechanic sounds fun to use in Lufenia Plus, and his debuffs are certainly noteworthy. His brave reductions will keep enemies breakable with his EX Plus debuff as a nice clutch when expecting a big attack. I'm especially excited to pair him with a unit like Yuna to pump his attack stat even further, which will scale with nearly everything he does. It's very important to note that with ExDeath's poisons, they scale solely off of attack. So HP damage increases from the research I've done don't actually affect the damage that his poisons do, but HP damage taken debuffs on the enemies do. So I think the reason I love ExDeath as well is because it's such a good character to just experiment with and do weird things with. And you can pair him up with so many weird and wonderful mixes of characters. Like him and Agrius, I think would be really cool as well. Like by having the attack buffs from Agrius while also having the HP regen and being able to neuter enemies pretty much ad nauseum because you're now adding Grand Cross to the list of things that Agrius does. I think above all else, I find, and I don't expect other people to, I find ExDeath to be one of the most enjoyable units in the game. And that's because he's so weird and wacky. Neoanimus says, sadly, it's a pass for me. Even though ExDeath was my first one-ticket EX back when he was released and I already pitied his LD and I used him in around 15 Lufenias, Agrius took all of my tickets. Though if Ace is good to me, ExDeath will get my BT tokens for sure. This is actually a very noteworthy thing. If you have ExDeath's LD and you have BT tokens to get the BT, you don't have to do it like I'm doing it and doing it day one. You can wait. You can sit there and go, okay, well, maybe I'll need this in the future, but I don't need it right now. Why not wait until your options are more expanded? Or if you don't have the LD, then obviously it's an easy skip for you because you should never pick up a BT without having the LD prior. But I think that it's a nice way to look at it, that if another character is good to you, you can go back and get one. So, like, I'm literally trying to avoid the temptation to pull on these banners, because I would quite like Ciaran, if nothing else. But I do think that, you know, with so many big hitters like Sid Reigns, Aphmau, Zidane, Ace, Zac, there's a lot of big hitters coming up in the near future. Taking any opportunity to save is probably a worthwhile one. So that's going to be all from today's video. It's a big one today because we had so much to cover, but hopefully you get something out of this. So thank you, my lovelies, for watching. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, click that bell for notifications of any future videos I might be making, and of course join me when ExDeath BT is released over on Twitch if you want to see how the event goes for me. I'm saying I'm going to resist pulling a few tickets on Ciaran, but I might not be able to. We will see how it goes. Thank you all very much for watching, and I will see you next time. Take care!